About 2 weeks ago, I got an email from Weiwei finally giving me the green light to go ahead and do a book on his ceramics with Thames and Hudson in London. So, with that in mind, now the whole research that I've been doing is going to take somewhat of a different form. On the slide there you see National Glass Centre. I've already been getting emails from all over the world joking about that fact. Yes, Tim, this is your moment. Because as you know, there's a bit of a divide between ceramics and glass. And so people have been emailing me wondering what I'm doing at the National Glass Centre. My partner Mark actually sent me an email saying, be careful, you can't trust an art medium you can see through. So with the idea that there's a fairly healthy competition between the two mediums, and there's a lot of glass people here, I'll get onto the lecture. But also let me warn you in advance, because I think there might be a few people in the audience that speak Chinese. I don't, and my pronunciation of Chinese words is even worse than my pronunciation of French, which is really terrible. Okay. Let me begin. Contemporary ceramics has never seen a showman like Weiwei. Well, if that doesn't prove it to you, then maybe the next slide will. You're going to have to get used to the fact that I'm highly irreverent, and I do try and get rid of the male nude photographs very early in the lecture. This is what you call a false start, just to warm you up a little and make you realize that this is going to be a serious lecture, but at the same time one with a lot of room for humor. So let's begin. Contemporary ceramics has never seen a showman like Weiwei, a passionate polymath who's taken on vast history of China's ceramic art, broken it apart, literally, turned it upside down, literally, reassembled it in fresh ways, vandalized treasures by Iron Age potters, questioned the authenticity of his country's ceramic patrimony, lampooned the connoisseurship surrounding ancient pottery and porcelain, and used the ceramic tradition to critique his government. Driven by an almost demonic ambition, he has produced hundreds of major works, comprising from 1 to 100 million individual components, the largest contemporary sculptural installations in ceramics to date. Has revised the ceramic canon and set the bar at a new and intimidating high. The rise of his career has been extraordinary. From 1983 to 1993, earned his living on the streets of New York. Let me just go back a little. The lecture will eventually get on its way. I haven't had much sleep in the last 48 hours. Okay, he has produced an ongoing series of major installations. Bubbles, which you see on the screen at the moment, which is 100 large blue glazed ceramic orbs, each weighing 90 pounds. And that was installed on Logan Island of Miami during Basel, Miami in 2008. Then with Field at Art Basel, he produced a vast grid of porcelain scaffolding, incongruously decorated with blue early Ming Dynasty motifs. And then came up with forests of parts that are 6, 7, and 8 feet high, rooms filled with seemingly wet puddles made out of ceramic and glaze. Forests of bamboo seemingly held together or pulled apart by parts at the top and the bottom. More recently, he started producing very large forests made out of wood, out of the actual trees, and supported by objects which he variously calls porcelain, rocks, marble blocks. He's described them as all over a different period of time, and yet at the same time, these porcelain objects also revert back to the blue and white tradition. Now, he's worked in a number of very different materials. Wood, plastic, bronze, and found materials as well. He also works in architecture, design, photography, and film. But we can surmise from the wide range of materials, or rather from the number of repeat visits, that ceramics occupies a very special place in his life. The cleverly titled Weiwei Dropping the Urn, Ceramic Works 500 BCE to 2010 CE, an exhibition organized by the Arcadia University Art Gallery, Glenside, Pennsylvania, is the first exhibition to examine this interest in a specific medium. It's now in its last week at the V&A, and this talk will deal mainly with this exhibition. The rise of his career has really been quite extraordinary. From 1983 to 1993, I earned his living on the streets of New York City as a quick sketch artist doing portraits of tourists. So, if any of you had a portrait done by you while you were in New York, check the signature very carefully. It could be a very valuable artwork today. He returned to China just as the Western fascination with contemporary art from that country was beginning to explode. His first solo museum show was in 2004 at the Kunsthalle Bern, and he has barely taken a breath since, bar 3 months when he was held incommunicado in Beijing. Last year, 7 years after his first show on at the Kunsthalle, I was placed number 13 on the list of the most influential figures in contemporary art. This year, he is number 1 on that list. Philip Gennari summarizes his career over this brief period of time as having moved from rebel to craftsman, from provocateur to bricoleur, and has shifted from Duchamp to Joseph Beuys, from ready-made to social sculpture. And then, of course, there is his piece that was at the Tate, which we will examine a little more closely later in the show as well. Certainly the largest ceramic installation ever. The exhibition is named after dropping a Han Dynasty urn. 3 photographs that dominate the exhibition, and photographs that were almost always in sight in the gallery, keeping one aware of the fundamentally transgressive nature of his art. A silent crash heard throughout the world. Ernest, one of I's earliest ceramic works, made 2 years after his return to China. It remains his most iconic work. The sheer audacity of the act, dropping a perfect, quote, museum-quality urn that has survived intact for 5,000 years, is riveting, but perfectly balanced by the look of cruel detachment on I's face as the vase explodes at his feet into 1,000 shards. Glenn Anderson, writing about this moment in the catalogue, takes an interestingly redemptive view. Quote, shod in traditional cloth slippers, I seems in these three heart-stopping filmic moments to stand astride all of China's culture. Ancientness is made to perform at 6 frames per second, but this is one big bang we can reverse by the simple means of reading it, as the Chinese sometimes do, from left to right. You see no harm was done after all. What could be more touching than this depiction of the artist gazing implacably as a shattered vessel makes itself whole and floats upwards into his hands, end quote. Many read this act as sacrilege and accuse either merciless of making art by destroying history. The Asian antiquities market was scandalized, but those who knew little about Asian art were the most offended, assuming that I had demolished an irreplaceable treasure. Urns of this period are relatively common, and depending upon condition can be inexpensive, but more apropos, as I points out to his critics, the urn is a proto-industrial product. It was mass-produced in hundreds of thousands of units, if not millions. It was industry then, he argued, so it remains industry today. The act is no more barbaric than if an artist, 5,000 years hence, does the same to a cheap vase purchased today from Kmart. Now, Kmart is an American store that sells shoddy goods. What is your comparison here? Do you have Kmart? No? Well, that's very lucky. I has never destroyed a work of canonical importance, and yet, as late as 2009, the New York Times was still describing the dropped urn as priceless. The urn is worth, at the very most, about $5,000, and then only in an antiquities gallery after passing through about a dozen middlemen. At its core, urn is an argument about authenticity. Is age a valid reason for increasing value? If it is, I'm probably increasing in value by the day. Does the linear in antiquity alter an object's original identity? Does it shift from artifact to art? Is the reverence that we accord rarity just a Pavlovian response to the manipulations of the centuries-old antiquities market? And is rarity merely an accident of survival, a mathematical equation? And is the honor we accord these ancient survivors romantic and misplaced? Together with Marcel Duchamp's porcelain urinal fountain, 1917, dropping the urn provides a bookend for avant-gardism in the 20th century. Both actions, submitting the fountain to the Independence Salon in New York and dropping the urn, created a furor. One took on the holy cows of early modernism, and I's performance did the same for postmodernism. Both were viewed as offensive, destructive acts, albeit for different reasons. And the ceramic component of these conceptual acts made the same fate. This result was deliberate in I's case, but sheer luck for the fountain in that Alfred Stieglitz decided to document the urinal's existence before, as legend has it, tossing it into a dumpster when he moved to a new studio. If he hadn't done that, that piece would probably be worth about $150 million today at the very least. I sometimes softens his blows with humor, sometimes sly and witty, at other times with blatant one-liners. But beneath this is a ruthless revisionism, and the urn's path of destruction, or deconstruction, continues on the exhibition in 4 other works on the show. Untitled from 1993, Coca-Cola bars, 1997. The colored vases from 2006 to 2008, although the production is still continuing today. And Dust to Dust in 2009. Coca-Cola bars was perceptibly balanced on the Arcadia show by placing it in a spacious cabinet with only one other work, Untitled, which is I's first ceramic piece. They clearly enjoy each other's company, winking conspiratorially, their logos flashing faux gold and alluding to capitalist sumptuary. Untitled, which is the piece in the whiskey bottle, begins in childhood wonder, recalling the moment we saw our first ship in a bottle. The Johnny Walker Red Label bottle contains a ceramic sculpture from the Song Dynasty, and confining this crude figure in the bottle is amusing. Two black dot eyes peer out of the bottle, wide-eyed with surprise at its predicament. It forces a chuckle. Actually, look closely and the magic disappears once sees it has been cut apart and glued together. The message in the bottle is primarily political. A dig at a regime that has begun to practice communism for profit. This brand of whiskey is the favorite amongst China's ruling elite. The more one looks at the work, the more discomforting it becomes. One cannot shake the suggestion of imprisonment, of a culture held hostage by commerce. The Coca-Cola bars aims to reach the viewer on two levels, both sensually and intellectually. There is a strong, conscious aesthetic component. I do not just slap the logo willy-nilly onto the part, but respect similarities between the swooping, lyrical schemas of Neolithic pottery decoration and Coca-Cola's logo with its voluptuous, cursive scrolling, integrating the logo with the contours of the parts, a perfect fit that is enveloping but elastic. Fragments of the original decoration, seen underneath the logo, cause the past to dance with the present. Time is one of I's raw materials, and here he gives it an almost plastic consistency. I also selected Coca-Cola because it is the definitive global consumer product, a beloved icon of pop art, and because it signifies the accommodation between communism and capitalism. In 1979, Coca-Cola became the first Western company allowed to distribute their products in China, and today they operate over 40 bottling plants and enjoy a 50% share of China's soft drink market. In I's mind, Coke is more than a beverage. It is an enabler of China's repression. And in case I haven't made the point before, these are all done on original Han Dynasty pots. These are not fakes or anything. This is the real thing. They're about 45,000 years old. He acquires these jars inexpensively at flea markets in and around Beijing, and has done so for years, and has amassed a large stock. He dips them in household paint, using distinctly contemporary colors, more redolent of Tupperware and Martha Stewart than of art. They are startlingly beautiful in their new clothes. The decorative effect of a cluster of these vases is gorgeously vibrant and cheekily fresh. Moore and Torchia contend that this act is not destructive, but as they put it, gently compromising, a device that neutralizes tradition and allows the contemporary aesthetic values to dominate. Masking the luster and bold decoration of the original surface, they write, the acrylic paint does not destroy the brushwork, which remains intact beneath the veneer of synthetic pigment. The exact contour of their pattern becomes each vessel's own secret. I's view is that to have other layers of colour, and I quote, and images above the precious, one calls into question both identity and authenticity of the objects. It makes both conditions non-absolute. You can cover something so that it is no longer visible, but it is still underneath. And what appears on the surface is not supposed to be there, but it is. His approach to ceramics is strictly hands-off. He maintains a ceramic studio in Jingdasheng with a staff of about 20, and then some subcontracts work to a small army of about 1,500 ceramists. When asked if he'd made any of the sunflower seeds for the tape project, he admitted, I made 3 or 4, but none of them were any good. Dipping the vases in paint is the closest that I get to being a ceramist. And let me just show a few more other examples. These are really quite remarkable the way they change the character of a historical part. If you think of these sitting in an antiquities museum, they have a totally different feel. The colour makes them strangely and convincingly modern. Dipping the vases in paint is the closest that I get to being a ceramist. In watching the video of him surfacing the parts, and these images are stills from that video, the mechanics are identical to glazing. And the chalky matte pastels really look a lot like raw glaze. The video also reveals I's playfulness. It begins like this: the work arrives, carefully packed, and then he begins to work. Some are double dipped in 2 colours. On some he reverses the trickle of colour so they seem to be refusing to obey gravity. Clearly, I relishes the simplicity, effectiveness, and the spontaneous physicality of this process. Good, that gets your prompt engines going, doesn't it? Now, what he's doing is an activity known as clobbering, a popular home industry in the 18th century, early 19th century, and it was taking extant ceramic work, not of one's own making, and adding embellishment, surface painting or decoration. The purpose was to make the object more attractive, or perhaps more fashionable, so it could be sold for profit. And this is exactly what I does in his groupings, which are worth many times the cost of the original Neolithic parts. Interesting and add some spice. It suggests that even when adding value, taking over someone else's object is in some sense violence, because it comes from late 17th century English, a street slang term for beating someone. And that is certainly true of Dust to Dust, one of the best works on the exhibition. As an object, it perches on that slippery cusp between ordinariness and edgy minimalism. At first glance, it is little more than a glass jar containing dust. Like all of his art, they're presented in different forms, and one of the shown up here was just a single vessel, but he also does large involvements of them as well. But the dust is the ground ceramic remains of Neolithic jars. What you're seeing came from this. Ground down urns placed in glass funerary urns. The title comes from, as The title comes from the graveside benediction in English burial services, from ashes to ashes, from dust to dust. Critics have attached many metaphors to this work, including that it represents construction sites, the grim-brown colour of Beijing's polluted air, or the ravaged industrial landscape of China. But it is strongest as art when viewed simply as a mediation on cultural life and death. How did that get back in? No, seriously, that was not intended. You know, if you don't get yourself photographed in the nude, it is going to appear in presentations. The same is true of Souvenir from Beijing from 2002. A great brick taken from the ruins of a destroyed house in a traditional futon. Narrow alleys lined by traditional courtyard residences. It rests in a coffin-like box made of ironwood salvaged from dismantled Qing Dynasty temples. This offers mournful respite, much like public viewing of a body prior to its burial. It also relates to his fascination with bricks and to his own architecture, extraordinary work, primarily done either with stone sections or with bricks, as we see in these two images. It finds its 20th century parallel in the somber piles of grey felt that Joseph Beuys showed in the late 1960s. And bricks, I argues, have a natural relationship with our hands, allowing us to build with them blindly, like using words to write something. On the exhibition were a number of blue and white pieces. Their genesis comes from a ghost goo vase from the Queen Long era of 1756 to 1795 that was sold at a Christie's sale on July 12, 2005 for $25,657,944. You notice I was very precise about that amount. This surprised the Chinese porcelain market because wine works of this period were not previously accorded much importance. I was intrigued by the vase's rise in fortune, musing why markets upgrade and downgrade cultural values, much like a Standard and Poor's bond revision. The painting on the vase was of an ancient morality tale. Strategist Guy Gu. Can anybody improve on the pronunciation? Oh, good. His real name was Wang Zhu. Races down the mountain into a valley to save a disciple. What he did was take this and interpret it in a completely different way. Having this complex scene painted on the inside of a vase. And of course, this is the only thing, you can only get away with this kind of virtuosity in China, trying to get that kind of painting skill in certainly the United States, maybe the United Kingdom, would be almost impossible. Secondly, placing the image out of sight until one is standing above the pot and looking down at it is a way of eye connecting with an ancient practice. Anwa. I'm sure I got that one right. Secret messages on porcelains painted very subtly, white on white, that are only discernible very close up. This typically appeared in high-quality imperial porcelains from the early Ming period. The purpose was not sedition. One will not find slogans reading "Down with the Emperor." Instead, they impart knowledge about the vase itself, providing a sense of privilege and knowledge to the owners of this piece. And by extension, they flatter the owner's status and refinement of their connoisseurship. Photographs taken in the courtyard of Ai's Beijing studio show a larger version, or a larger vision, in this installation called Ghost Who Descends the Mountain. They're wrongly described as replicas in the catalogue, and they do not credit Ai's collaborator on the series, a Romanian-American artist, Sergei Spitzer. Each set comprises 96 parts. The calming, orderly rhythm of the assembled platoons of vases is particularly satisfying when viewed from a position where these lines of parts run diagonally rather than square, for reasons that we will see later. A Zen-like tranquility rises from this assembly, not unlike the hypnotic brickwork we saw in his architecture. They both remind us that Ai has no difficulty with beauty. He may not actively seek it out, but at the same time one rarely sees a work by Ai, no matter what its conceptual purpose, that is not also aesthetically pleasurable. Much as he's touted as an intellectual, he is every bit, and maybe more, a sensualist, thus his ease with ceramics. So there you see that the same group of parts organize a little differently. If you look at them carefully, you'll begin to see sections of white towards the back of the grouping. And what he has done is he has taken the parts and painted just enough of the ghost Who scene, so that if you stand at a certain point, all the vases look fully painted. And yet, in fact, when you get to the back, there are some that only have a 3 or a 4-inch strip of painting, because that's all that is visible to the eye from that particular vantage point. So it really is rather a charming piece. I think you can see it a little more clearly in that photograph. And the ethereal white exteriors of the parts connects with the ghost Who tale. Who means ghost, and refers to the mysterious valley into which the prophet was ascending. Legend has it that it remained shrouded in mists for time, and its swirling vapors were seen, and in its swirling vapors were seen diaphanous ghosts. And the white vases seen in mass do handsomely symbolize a planet of fog. Untitled is a large, handsome porcelain jar with a satin glaze of celadon that is one of the more successful standalone works. Most of Ai's works tend to work much better when they are done in quantity and done as an installation. Indeed, multiplication, used so successfully by Ai in his ceramic works, will not serve this piece very well. Again, it has to do with the secret writing. Only when one is standing next to the part does one see the blue and white ceramic orb-shaped pot with its small mouth that is nestled inside the vessel. It suggests an oculus, and it causes a strange sensation. The past is looking at us, maybe judging us. It is a direct piece, obvious in its intent, and satisfying without the burden of myriad meanings and metaphors that clutter critical writing about Ai. The exhibition also had 3 17th century replicas of blue and white wares, a ginger jar, a moon flask, and a bottle vase, and we will just look at the moon flask. Now these are convincing reproductions to the lay eye. This series began around 2001 when his flea market favourite and many times collaborator gave up his market stall in Beijing and moved to Jingshan, introducing Ai to that town. In perfect synchronicity, Liu fires his kilns for only two reasons. One is to make the work of Ai, and the other to produce convincing forgeries of Chinese porcelains that are then inserted into auction sales. It is real and fake, Ai's obsession in daily production. Ai argues, if there is no recognizable difference between this piece and an authentic piece, what does this do to the value of the original period piece, or for that matter, a modern replica? Let us say we place an exact copy in a museum setting. Would this not completely confuse museum goers? Is it real or fake? How can a museum exhibit a modern production as an authentic period piece? Does this not undermine the whole system? Authenticity, real or fake? This is a fetish for Ai, who's even named his studio Fake Design. Also because of the confusing closeness in the Chinese characters for fake and fuck. But there is something about these works that is a touch self-important. The question he poses was answered long ago. The thriving forgery industry in China has been doing an exceptional job for centuries and continues today. Forgers now even mix grog made from older ceramic shards with their clay to provide false positives in the carbon dating tests. The system adjusted long ago to deal with this. It poses some threat, but nothing calamitous. Scholarship has advanced in the last couple of decades, and with all due respect to Ai, passing off these works as real has become a lot more difficult. So it's one of the occasions where we sort of have a kind of fake issue in his work, which may indeed be his intent, but the ideas that are put forward when they are tested by logic don't really seem to add up to him. The exhibition concludes with two snack foods. Watermelon 2006 and his first sunflower seed installation from 2009. The watermelons to continue a dietary theme can be described as Ai-light. Charming and fun, but no great meaning is attached, nor are they meant to be faithful trompe-l'oeil images of the real thing. From group to group, Ai changes the color schemes using different yellow and green glaze combinations, showing them both singly and in groups. Watermelon belongs to a series of joke pieces that Ai makes from time to time. The most infamous of these being P, 2007. It comprises disconnected male genitals suspended in the air, held up by a stream of urine. On one level, it is just a side gag, given its unpretentious pleasure, but on another, it is also Ai's homage to Duchamp's art. His first seed work, however, is a different matter entirely. It sits on the floor, a ton or more or less of life-sized sunflower seeds in porcelain. Their husks painted to mimic the real thing. Its gravitas is both literal and conceptual. When Ai talks about this series, it is clear that the sunflower seeds are hugely meaningful. When his father was confined to a labor camp when I grew up, detainees would surreptitiously pass seeds to each other as a gift, a rare moment of compassion and a covert means of signifying solidarity. All of these tales are riveting, of course, and the more the talks he gives, the more anecdotes he provides, footnotes when the real subject is really Chen Mao. Like Louis XIV before him, he was depicted during the Cultural Revolution as the sun. Sunflowers are sessile moving during the day to face the sun, and as such become perfect metaphors for Mao's subjects, obediently facing his heliotropic face. The irony is that under Mao's rule, hunger was widespread, and the seeds were often the only food staples that were abundant. Writing about the Tate's exhibition of these seeds, Charles Darwin captures the work's essence. Quote, "Each seed offers a kind of hope, of food, of kindness, and yet each is like a minute and inedible stone monument, so the work is at once both lively and deathly. In those contradictions of massive numbers and individuality, of humility and grandeur, happiness and pain, Sunflower Seeds is like China itself." The obvious question that arises is whether this message is communicated more effectively by increasing the tonnage of seeds. Does quantity make the work more or less profound? Does the absence of any distinctive form, the floor of seeds while not formless, comes close? Does that make any difference? The mound of seeds at Arcadia is a powerful primordial shape, an early burial mound. It also suggests a mountain, an ever-present sacred element in Chinese law. But instead of rock and dirt, here it is made up of humanity. It represents China's citizens. There is also a strong contemporary connection to modern minimalism and abstraction. But it is more than just shape. It is what it does with those seeds. In the mounds, they rise closer and closer, reaching up to the level of one's eye as one approaches the crest. In the process, they become increasingly individualistic as we discern that each one is slightly unique. This is a masterful and moving poetic conception. Now, what are Ai's views of ceramics? In a conversation with the Swiss curator Hans Ulrich Obrist, Ai states, quote, "Yes, ceramics is kind of crazy. I hate ceramics, but I do it. I think if you hate something too much, you have to do it. You have to use that," end quote. Taking their cue perhaps too literally from that statement, the curators write about ceramics as though the medium is a pariah, or as they put it, a contested schismatic arena in which, quote, "Ai exercises as well as exercises his contempt for ceramics by his fearless use of it." I hope at least one or two of you are becoming annoyed by that statement at this point. This view of ceramics is outdated. Over the last decade, ceramics has become a ubiquitous presence in major galleries, certainly in the United States and probably somewhat here as well. Secondly, these comments impose an early modernist apartheid, a decidedly Western viewpoint of ceramics on an Asian artist from a country where ceramics are rightly revered. What we are really witnessing with Ai and the Kiln is a white-hot love-hate affair with all of the ambivalence that generates. And this affair began young. Ceramics was literally part of Ai's patrimony. His father, the famous modern poet Ai Kuang, was a collector. And when he fell from grace, he and his family were banished in 1957, when Ai was 1 year old, living in a hut half dug into dirt on a desert labor farm in Xinjiang, a harsh province bordering Russia, in which only 4% of the land is habitable. Rudimentary shelves were installed in the Ai house, and they held a small collection of Chinese ceramics of lesser value. When he was reinstated in 1979, the poet and his family returned to Beijing. One of his first acts was to retrieve the more important ceramics he'd left for safekeeping during his banishment. As Tenari perceptively states, ceramics for Ai Kuang was a vehicle for memory. His son inherited the same belief. If anything, one senses that I find ceramics overwhelming. Too much history, too much symbolism, too much beauty, romance, and allure. It engulfs, frustrates, and excites him in equal parts. He speaks of porcelain with rapture. Quote, "There were two things in ancient China that left the outside world incapable of resistance. One was silk, the other was porcelain. It is also instructive that I has never clobbered antique porcelain. And he has only once smashed an old porcelain, and that was during a 1996 performance when he broke two blue and white dragon bowls from the Kingsley era. He's showing here with a hammer in his hand, but a white shroud covers the porcelain, shielding us from the brutality of the act. A very different attitude to the full frontal destruction in Dome. I is finally a porcelain snob." Ceramics has its own place in the artist's earth. It is less politically provocative, for instance, and more likely to express beauty than in other mediums. Tonari explains as well, quote, "Unlike his reconstructed furniture, Ai's ceramic work could not be interpreted as riffs on historically Chinese forms, and unlike his New York period of conceptual experiments, or his later architectural practice, they could not be explained away as a homage to Duchamp or modifications of Mies. Tinier and more cunning than the ricer versions of his work in wood, less sarcastic and provocative than his photographs, Ai Weiwei's ceramic interventions of this brief period are amongst his most fanciful objects," end quote. But he goes on to say, "Objects this strange simply did not exist before their creator's urge." Tonari's remark is, alas, a common conception about Ai's ceramics. Ai's side-joke sculptures like P actually hark back to the 1960s and the California punk movement and the work of Robert Arneson, amongst others. Smashing pots, forests of 7-foot pots, oil spills with clay and glaze, Coca-Cola logos on seemingly ancient forms, trompe-l'oeil dresses and Chinese snack foods, and satiric play with blue and white tradition have all been staples, even cliches, on the ceramic scene in the US for decades. So this is a very good moment to ask, where is ceramics in terms of art? Where does ceramics place him? Is he a hero or a villain? The rub for contemporary studio ceramics is less the love of his art. Indeed, the ceramist gets his nuances better than most. But it is the ceramic art's invisibility in these discussions that is disturbing. It would be refreshing if, when ceramics and art is discussed, critics bother to cross the street and seek some contextual correspondence with the clay community, and give it credit for innovation where it is due, rather than giving that in a misplaced form to art. But this is an in-house argument. It matters little, finally, to the quality of Ai's art. Contemporary ceramics has never had an artist who so forcefully thrust ceramics into the heart of the fine arts. Again and again, raising the bar at every outing. It is fair to say that because of Ai, the first contemporary star to emerge from China, that's a very interesting point, great Chinese ceramic culture, but this is the first time we've had an international artist working with the medium to this extent. The art world is today more aware of ceramics, its history, its power, and its seductiveness than any time since Josiah Wedgwood launched his vase mania in the 18th century. In between stands Duchamp with his fountain, and together with